Good afternoon, everyone. It is 3 p.m., the start of our webinar, and I see that we have already some participants with us. I think we can start. Thank you all for joining this NESET webinar organized by NESET, the network of experts working on the social dimension of education and training in collaboration with the European Commission and to be more precise, with the school unit, the unit schools and multilingualism from the Directorate-General of Education, Youth, Sports and Culture, and also with the unit A4 evidence-based policy, who is the unit responsible also for the coordination of NESET on the European Commission side. This NESET webinar entitled "What Makes Educational Systems Resilient? Reflecting upon Recent Societal Challenges" comes in the sequence of many challenges that educational systems in Europe and beyond have been facing, as we all know, ranging from the COVID-19 pandemic and the way it massively affected educational systems, geopolitical instability and war in Europe even, and in other parts of the world, together with economic recession and instability overall, that all impact young people and children, and also the way educational systems work, are funded, and we relate to them as societies. So today the objective will be based on the work conducted by the European Commission on different important files that are connected with these societal challenges, reflect upon these, and also understand how NESET network and research have provided evidence-based recommendations and orientations for policy work and to improve education for all. We will first hear from Monica Keppe Holmberg, who is the head of evidence-based policy and evaluation at the Director-General for Education, Youth, Sports and Culture at the European Commission. She is responsible for developing and analyzing evidence to better inform EU policymaking in dialogue with international organizations. Monica has worked in Brussels for over 20 years in the areas of education, training, and employment, and she holds degrees in economics, business administration, and European studies. So, Monica, I give you the floor for opening this webinar and a brief introduction on current challenges in European education. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cosmin, and a very warm welcome to all participants today. And you already mentioned the title of today's webinar is "What Makes Educational Systems Resilient?" So let me just start recalling the early morning hours of 24th of February 2022. On that day, people in Ukraine awakened to news of the outbreak of the war. And the bombings on this February morning also marked the beginning of the Russian invasion. The war that, as we have experienced, does not only devastate the lives of Ukrainians, but it has also brought about a fundamental change to what we thought was actually possible in our continent, in Europe. The invasion brought war back into our consciousness, and it also reminded us that peace should not be and could not be taken for granted. So this was clearly a moment of disruption, a rupture that also forces us to reflect upon our previously unquestioned ways of being. And these are the moments that also put the state of play into a new perspective. These are also moments, events, dates that we often define in history as a before and an after. I mentioned the war in Ukraine, but the war in Ukraine is just one crisis occurring within other crises. The invasion of Ukraine took place just 2 years after the COVID-19 pandemic seemed to be coming to an end, at least on the European continent, something that, Cosmin, you have also referred to. We were already at a point where we were beginning to assess the extent of the social impact, of the economic impact of the pandemic. And then in parallel, the consequences of the global climate crisis are also becoming increasingly evident. And also there, the need for radical action is also clear. Well, to be honest, it has also been clear for some time now. And all this is happening at the same time as other deep transformations also occupy a greater space in our lives. Technology keeps evolving, and here it's enough to mention AI, artificial intelligence, that is on our lips these days, or mass media that gives a voice and eyes and possibly also wings to people in ways that we would not have imagined 20, 30 years ago. And if you allow me also to quote something from our the Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, who said in a recent Youth Dialogue that we are facing an age of disruptive change. And we will experience a green industrial revolution, which is early comparable to the first industrial revolution, the one which will bring about similar fundamental social change. So all these disruptions I've been referring to made it all too clear that business as usual is not a luxury that education systems can afford. And all these disruptions bring challenges, but at the same time also opportunities with new pathways that people may follow as learners, hopefully as lifelong learners, also as countries in the EU strive for fairer, greener, and more resilient societies. The question for us remains, are our education and training systems succeeding in empowering people to embark upon and navigate these new pathways? Education is becoming much less about what you learn and much more about what you do with what you have learned and what you know. This also means that education systems must provide learners with the opportunities to acquire the knowledge, acquire the skills that they require as they progress through all these pathways. And this is also about ownership over what we learn, how we learn it, and where we learn it. And we will hear a lot about it in the coming hour. And of course, by doing this, countries will also achieve, we hope at least, more resilient learners, more resilient education systems, and ultimately resilient societies. As I say, this is what we hope education policymakers, this is what we like to believe. But what does research say? And here, as you already mentioned also in the last year's NESET, the network of experts working on the social dimension of education and training was looking into the impact of all these diverse challenges and also the impact of the disruptions on education. And we are eager to hear the evidence the experts of the network gathered and the reflections upon the evidence, the lessons learned. And today we will also illustrate how the findings, the knowledge of the network, which I also have to highlight, a key knowledge provider to us in the European Commission, but also to the wider education community. So how the network informed several EU policy initiatives. The Council recommendation on learning for green transition and sustainable development, another Council recommendation on pathways to school success, but also all our initiatives that meant to welcome Ukrainian children in EU educational systems. And let me conclude by saying that no one can be sure what tomorrow will bring, nor how history will assess our actions of today. But whether with historical hindsight, young people will become known as the climate generation or the COVID-19 generation or even the war generation or something else, it all depends on how the challenges, the disruptions that we experience, we are able to tackle today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica, for this very interesting introduction, and I'm sure that we will refer to some of the challenges and phenomena that you identified now throughout the webinar. Now I would like to give the floor to Dragana Avramov, who is the scientific coordinator of NESET. She is author of over 70 scientific articles and 15 books related to youth, inclusion, and education. She is also co-author of a forward-looking study entitled Global Europe 2050, published by the European Commission, and Evolution, Science and Ethics in the Third Millennium, published by Springer. Dragana, if you could make also an introduction to the NESET network, the topics that has been covering and linking with what Monica Kepe just shared with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Cosmin. The primary mission of NESET is to undertake a targeted literature review to support EC and member states' education policies. Typically, we harvest the broad knowledge base generated by the European research community, systematize it, and identify pathways and effective policies and practices in view of informing and possibly contributing to transforming the existing education policies. Considering the diversity of the education landscapes in the EU countries, and the awareness that third countries may be confronted with similar challenges and may have implemented measures that have proven to be effective in their contexts, NESET has been also scooping information and making sense of available data from countries such as UK, US, Australia, Canada, situating thus EU as part of the global world. In most recent years, NESET has been increasingly confronted with a certain research deficit. Policy needs, and Monica has highlighted so well some of the key ones, but these policies needs appeared to be evolving faster than the production of robust research-based knowledge and effective monitoring of what works and what does not work in education. As researchers, we know that we need systematic building of the knowledge base through fundamental and applied research to be able to respond effectively in emergency situations. But we also need the research community to adapt and respond to policy needs for a fast collation of knowledge. And a typical emerging policy question is the one that we will be discussing today, how education can contribute to resilience of individuals, groups, institutions, and society at large in face of the unknown. This quest for evidence to guide education policies was indeed the driver of Horizon Europe allocation of a significant budget under the call Inclusiveness in Times of Change. And at least 3 projects addressing education resilience were launched in 2022. But the catch-22 of this highly positive increase of investment is that the first research results from these European projects will become available in 25 and 26. So there, the NESET pool of experts and I would say solidity of our coordination practices allowed us to partially reconcile the quest for timely knowledge to support education policies at times of crisis with the inherently slow process of large-scale research. And indeed, in more recent years, NESET expanded its activities and carried out some ad hoc data gathering and resorted to deliberative methodology to generate new knowledge by mobilizing skills and competencies of a broad array of stakeholders. As a network, we were well placed to use collective intelligence. In this way, we could give our very modest contribution to learning how to deal with emergency situations in education in recent years. we could draw on the cumulative value of research in the past and keep an eye on specificities of the responses to emerging issues and on the longer-term perspectives. Today's webinar showcases three seemingly diverse topics: sustainability, well-being, refugees. So a valid question is there a binding thread to the three societal challenges? I would say yes, because they encapsulate processes that put to test the education system's resilience. Indeed, authors of NESET reports will focus today on highlighting what makes education system resilient. And we will very briefly identify practices and measures that we hope will be inspirational for the future. So let's kickstart each topic, and hopefully by the end of the day, the cross-fertilization of knowledge will have produced added value for us all. To you, Cosmin.
Thank you so much, Dragana, for this comprehensive introduction to NESET and the work developed by the NESET network, and also the broad overview of current challenges regarding evidence and research in Europe and beyond. You have also mentioned already that the webinar of today, as our participants must have seen, it is divided in three main areas: well-being, sustainability first, well-being, and then refugee and migrant children education. And we will hear from a policy officer from the European Commission working on these topics, and then from NESET experts that have collaborated with the Commission precisely on these topics. And after each intervention, each block of the three thematic areas, we will have questions also for the speakers. I would like also to warmly welcome. Now we have almost 50 attendees with us, and I saw from the chat that many of you come from ministries of education from different member states. So we believe this is a positive message that colleagues in the ministries are interested in these topics that are fundamental and will influence the way educational systems will develop in upcoming years. So now heading towards the topic of learning for the green transition and sustainable development, I will give the floor to Ulrike Pisiotis, who is a policy officer in the schools unit of the Commission's Directorate-General for Education, Youth, Sports and Culture, where she works mainly on sustainability education. She is also one of the co-authors of Green Comp, the EU Sustainability Competence Framework. Having joined the Commission in 2009, she has held various positions and gained extensive experience in education and research policies and systems within the EU and beyond. Ulrike, the floor is yours, and you have 7 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you very much. And I'm trying to share my screen. Oops, just a second.
Of course. Yeah, I think it's coming up.
Not it yet. Okay, can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see your notes as well. I don't know if that is intended.
Not intended. Just a second. Okay, it worked before, but okay, let me.
I can try for you if you want. Ulrike?
Yeah, maybe if you can. Sorry, because oh no, second. Wait a second. I think I can. Now it didn't come up the window before, so now it should.
Yes, perfect.
It's okay.
Let me see, which one is it?
We can see it now.
Okay, great. And you don't see my notes?
No, but can you try to go further in the presentation just to see if it works? We only see the main page.
Just a second. Okay. I don't know what happened here. Yeah, maybe, I don't know, Ulrike, you share for me if that's possible. I don't know, it worked before, but now I'm not.
I can also share, but
yeah, thank you very much. Sorry about that.
Okay, I will do, and then no worry about it. You can always consult your notes on your own computer. Perhaps it's even easier. So just a second.
Okay, maybe I make a start while you pull up the presentation.
Yeah, I think you should be able to see it now.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so first of all, good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be here, and also very happy to see that sustainability is part of a discussion on resilience of education systems, because I think so far perhaps we are not used so much to factor in the effects of climate change and to talk about sustainability in education systems, and that's just because we are very lucky here in this geographical regions, because in other parts of the world, really students, teachers, schools, they already feel much more the effects of climate change, and actually in the worst case it prevents them even from attending school perhaps and from receiving education, because schools have been flooded or because there are droughts, fires that might make it impossible to follow education. So sustainability education, with that in the background, in the back of our minds, it really means that sustainability education is not just something that is nice to have, but that is actually existential for learners and for education systems, that they respond to the planetary crisis in terms of their operations and in terms of their infrastructure as well, but also, and very crucially, how they prepare learners to live, work, and act more sustainably. And we can move to the next slide now. And this is why the European Commission wants to support member states in their efforts to integrate sustainability education into their education and training systems. And this is why member states adopted in June 2022 a council recommendation to give impetus to what EU countries are doing already to embed sustainability into education and training, and also to have guidance, because the recommendation can really serve as a roadmap to EU countries, as well, of course, to the Commission on what needs to be considered for advancing sustainability education. The Council recommendation is accompanied by a so-called staff working document. This is the icon that you see here in the middle with a girl on the cover, and this is created in the form of a handbook for education stakeholders, and it details the context of the recommendations that are put forward in the policy initiative. The recommendation as such, they span 10 priority areas. You can also see them here on the slide. And as you can see here, the recommendation takes a lifelong learning approach. So including the importance to start educating for sustainability early, to already start with that in early childhood education and care, to introduce novel pedagogies, competences for sustainability, to develop them are very, very important. We need to look at learning environments. We need to look at, to have good policies, top-down or top-level policies and strategies that support sustainability in education. So these 10 priority areas, they really underpin all the recommendations that are put forward in the policy initiative. And the recommendations that are being made, they are made at the level of the system, of institutions, for learners and for educators. And we can move to the next slide. As I explained already, the recommendation is also a roadmap for the member states, but also for the Commission. So the Commission is invited to work with member states jointly on implementing sustainability education. So this means facilitating cooperation and peer learning. It means identifying and sharing good practice. This we do mainly through a working group that we have established with member states, where we work with ministries of education, share good practice and learn from each other. It is also, of course, through developing resources and research. It means involving and engaging young people to monitor the development of green skills and competences, also to strengthen international cooperation, especially with UNESCO, with the OECD, that has worked extensively on education for sustainability. And of course, funding is a very important aspect. So greening, the green dimension is a major priority for the Erasmus Plus program. And also, of course, we want to monitor and report on progress that member states are making in implementing sustainability education. And moving to my last slide, please. Thanks a lot. So what I want to mention specifically also in terms of developing and sharing resources is a competence framework on sustainability education that was published along with the recommendation. And this is called GreenComp, and it describes a set of sustainability competences which can help learners think, act, and plan with empathy, responsibility, and care for the planet. It covers 4 big competence areas relating to values, futures, complexity, and action in sustainability. So this is already a very concrete tool that member states can use to further advance sustainability education, to help learners develop sustainability competences. It can be used, for example, in education and training policies and strategies, for curricular review, for developing teaching material or resources, self-reflection. So it really is, there's really a broad range of possible uses. It has been also translated into all official EU member states so that the education community can work with it in their own language and can adapt it also according to their needs and contexts. And again, the Commission is very keen in supporting this process of using GreenComp and of developing sustainability competences. And this is why we have also set up a community of practice for the users of GreenComp to further stimulate that process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ulrike, for this very detailed and yet focused presentation, and for showcasing these relevant instruments that the Commission has been developing. I'm sure our participants will find them very useful. Now I will give the floor to Antje Disterheft, who is a researcher and integrated member at Center for Environmental and Sustainability Research from Nova School of Science and Technology at the Nova University, Lisbon. Her research focuses on capacity building and new approaches to collaboration and co-creation for sustainability in higher education institutions. She is also a member of the Executive Commission of the Portuguese Network of Sustainable Campus. And Antje will react to some extent to Ulrike's presentation and how the knowledge of NESET relates with policy initiatives, and think about how we can tackle the environmental crisis towards greener educational systems and more sustainable societies. Antje, you will have 7 minutes for your talk.
Okay, let me just see if you see my screen?
Yes, we can. You can put it in full screen if you prefer.
I had done so, I thought.
Yeah, now it is, yes.
And it's without the notes?
Without notes, yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Cosmin, for the introduction, and good afternoon to everyone in the audience. It's a pleasure for me being here. I really thank NESET for this initiative and for the invitation. And I'm also really happy to see, like Ulrike was already saying, that this topic is being discussed on such high levels in policy making, and then also calling attention to many educators also from all levels. So I was asked to prepare a few thoughts on this aspect of tackling the environmental crisis towards greener educational systems and more sustainable societies. And actually it builds on what Ulrike just was saying on developing the specific competencies to go there. I want, first of all, to bring a leverage points perspective. So I take here now a little bit more the research, the researcher's role, but I find it interesting and inspiring to remember what Donella Meadows already many years ago thought about what are the leverage points for systems change. And I want to highlight that one of the strongest leverage points is working on values and our worldviews. Second, then also our attachment, what means our relationships, our emotional bonds that we have with people, with places. And then, of course, also the knowledge. But so these areas are very important that we give them more attention, I would say, in our educational system to work with our values, with our emotional attachments that we are having, as these might help levering our systems change. And in the end, we can also say this relates to the heart, head, and hands approach that is advocated in holistic education. And so with the hand, I also highlighted here our interaction and education that strives for the interaction and for experiences. And in this little figure here on the bottom, another element is added. What now is also gaining more importance is the importance of health. So we can say that this heart, head, and hands approach is linked to the overall health of educators and of pupil students, because only with a general well-being we will be able to develop further all our reflections and our actions. And I want to bring one more author teams. So this leverage points perspective has, of course, been advanced by many scholars, and Absen and al. Bring the distinction between deep leverage points for sustainability transformation versus tangible but weak leverage points. And these authors distinguish or highlight that deep leverage points is one, reconnecting people to nature, restructuring institutions, and third, rethinking how knowledge is created and used in the pursuit of sustainability. And I think here also, if we want to think about the resilience in our educational system, we have these 3 points give us many ideas. How can we reconnect better people during their educational process to nature, and not only children and pupil students, also including the staff, the educators, the teacher themselves? How can we restructure our institutions, especially overcoming, now I'm thinking a bit of higher education, overcoming these disciplines, silos, where it's still, even though we all advocate inter and transdisciplinary research and collaborations, still many of the research done maintains in the different disciplines, and it's still difficult on a structural level really to overcome these discipline barriers. And then also to rethink how the knowledge is created, meaning also here more opening up to science, to society, that science is not only done by the experts, but that we go more towards this collaboration, and also using different forms of knowledge. For example, also including here more the embodied learning, how our body informs also us in our decisions, or how can it be a sourceful resource in our knowledge creation. Nevertheless, as time is short, I just want to focus now on the first aspect of types of human nature relationships. And I bring here another figure that I find interesting, and hopefully it's inspiring to the audience as well. And this graph is developed by Richardson and al. And they have here offer different types, how we can then develop better pathways to nature connectedness. And so I think all of us, we know that being outdoors is important and beneficial for us, for our health, etc. It's still said it's not enough just being outside. Especially in education, scholars encourage a mix of activities and approaches that include the mind and body through, for example, the sensory contact, noticing beauty, calling and meaning making, and calling these a pathway to nature connectedness. And our current dominant relationships, they focus more on survival and progress, and they are more based on the utility or control of nature, or even maybe also developing fear of nature. And this is a failing relationship, as we can see now with the warming climate, with biodiversity loss. And whereas when we try to focus our senses and or if we focus and include the senses and focus also on our emotional attachment, bringing beauty into our discourses, this can help developing then a new relationship. And there are manifold benefits like mental well-being, and I would even say going beyond mental well-being, also a sense of belonging, and also pro-nature and pro-environmental behavior. And these scholars also suggest that this framework might be used, for example, for curricular development, and therefore this can then eventually also help finding new ways how we can implement better, not only in small initiatives, but more on a structural level, this nature connectedness in our educational system. And yeah, so I go now, I think, as we have a little time, to the next slide. The last. Don't know why it's not going further.
Perhaps if you click on the arrow down there.
Yeah, I tried. Now it went now. Thank you. So, and I this is now my last slide, and I just would like to bring here some more concreter examples. And this is a figure in a relatively recent articles by Luis Chorla from 2020. And I found it very useful and inspiring because it's not only about catering for this nature connectedness, but also for hope. And as we probably all know, the mental well-being of many children and young people around the globe is in an alarming state. And many educators are also unsure how to deal, for example, with eco-anxiety or also pessimistic visions for the future of their pupils and students. So in this graph, we can find examples for cultivating a sense of connectedness, as shown, for example, in the blue arrow. And this can be like short-term activities, but also then long-term engagement in nature or recording nature experiences through science, writing, and the arts. And then the yellow arrow gives examples how to support constructive coping, for example, through opportunities to share emotions. And this, I would like to stress, is really something very important, but still too little practiced in schools and higher educations. So there's still these emotions. We know that they're important, but often they are not giving the safe enough space that they can be integrated in the classroom. And then also learning. So this can, then also we can, in this coping strategy, try to find a positive reappraisal of problems and also learn the science about problem solving. And in the middle, the green arrow, it's the combination of the blue and the yellow. It focuses on the interdependence of positive and negative environmental conditions and how to foster the care and empathy, for example, through this free time in nature, but also through positive role models and joining collective initiatives to study and protect nature. So when supported constructively, when the emotions can be supported constructively, and here I also refer to the comforting and discomforting ones, they also hold really big potential for deep learning. And there we can then reflect again about our personal values and worldviews. And here I close the loop to the leverage points perspective at the beginning, as we see that values and our attachments are deep levers for system change. And yeah, for a more effective strategy, I still would like to say that better training for pre-service educators, but also those in service through continuous professional development need to be more or stronger be provided. And I hope that thereby, or I think thereby the educational systems can become more resilient and foster the deep leverage points for sustainability. And I hope I did not take too long. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Antje, for this very interesting presentation. And now I will give the floor right away to Ulrike, because she has to leave very shortly. And just for a 1 minute answer to this question that connects to the presentations that you both did, which is despite increased awareness of the importance of sustainability, there is still a huge disparity in how sustainable development mainstreams into education systems, very often not being the central value. So how do you think they can be truly integrated into educational systems, curricula, and teacher training?
Thank you very much for the question. And actually, this is also something that we saw when we prepared our different actions. In research, we had a mapping that was done to see how sustainability education is integrated in member states' education systems so far. And what we can see that actually overall, there is sustainability in pretty much all the curricula in all member states. But the extent differs, and also, of course, what is then actually happening on the ground? How much is this supported, for example, through teacher training, through financing, like whole school approaches, which are very conducive to sustainability learning. And of course, and this is also part of the answer to that question, member states are also struggling with other big challenges. So it's not only climate change, sustainability, education, and you will hear more about those different challenges very soon. We had a pandemic not very long ago. There is digitalization that needs to be implemented. Also, there are massive teacher shortages in many member states. And of course, if you don't have teachers to begin with, then it is hard to implement sustainability education or actually any other education agenda. But at the same time, and this is something I want to stress, we cannot really wait to advance on sustainability education. We really need to urgently develop sustainability competences for learners, for all people, to make the right choices about the way they live, about the way they work, and they act in general. So there are many different angles from which we can approach this, but what we saw as being very, very useful is, first of all, to really have long-term commitment from the top level. So to have top-level policies, like dedicated strategies. This really benefits the integration of sustainability education. To then approach this in a holistic way, so not just introduce sustainability as a topic, as an add-on in curricula, but also to align it to assessment, to design the appropriate teacher training, to look at learning environments, look at infrastructure. And also, and I think this is something important to stress, is to recognize that learning for sustainability is also an opportunity that can improve and enrich learning overall, because it is, or it should be, rooted in real life experience. It is very often project-based. It can engage partnerships beyond the school. So this is something that can enrich and improve the quality of the learning experience overall.
Thank you so much for your answer, Ulrike. And I think that we are running a little bit late, but I feel that this topic of well-being, of sustainability and green transition was very well covered by Ulrike's presentation and Anje's presentation, and now this comprehensive answer from Ulrike that we need directed top-level policies. And also, as Anje's presentation was somehow suggesting that there is a paradigm shift, there is something that has to change radically in education systems in order to be able to integrate this sustainability mindset in our educational institutions and practices. And this, of course, connects with the next topic of well-being. And here I will invite Annalisa Canoni to share with us more on the Pathways to School Success initiative. And Annalisa is the policy officer for the school education in DG AAC. She works on inclusion in school education with a special focus on improving competence development, including achievement in basic skills, reducing early school leaving, and promoting well-being and supportive learning environments. Annalisa, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, please. We cannot hear you, Annalisa. No, not yet. Perhaps Kasia can support us.
Try to mute and then mute once again for a bit.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good, because it was okay when we tested and I haven't done anything. Okay, good morning. Thank you very much, Cosmin, and good afternoon, rather, everybody. I would like to briefly present you two recent initiatives of the European Commission in the area of inclusive education and well-being at schools. Two initiatives for which NESET support has been really precious and crucial from the very beginning, from the very start. My colleague Ulrike should be sharing a slide. Thank you very much. So it is the Pathway to School Success initiative and a recent initiative, an expert group for promoting supportive learning environment and well-being in schools. These two initiatives can be seen really as the two sides of the same coin. Of the same holistic vision for more inclusive, more supportive and caring education, a vision in which school success is not just about academic achievements. They are crucial, they're essential, of course, but where successful education is really about offering all learners the possibility to flourish, to grow, and really develop, grow their full potential. Now, it is important to remind that for these two initiatives, we're not exactly starting from scratch, because we could rely and build on very good lessons learned from the past and more than a decade of work and cooperation at European level in the field of inclusion, with a specific attention, for example, on the work carried out to reduce early school leaving. I think we can move to the next slide. So Pathway to School Success, what it is, it's basically a council recommendation which was adopted by the 27 education ministers in November last year. And its objective is to promote better educational outcomes for all learners. whatever their story, whatever their circumstances, their personal situation, their family background, the cultural background, the socioeconomic background, everybody has the right to succeed at schools. And this big objective is somehow declined, articulated into three sub-goals, we could say. Reducing low achievement in basic skills, which appears to be one of the greatest challenges for our education systems in Europe nowadays. Increasing secondary education attainment, meaning reducing the number of young people that leave education and training without an upper secondary qualification diploma. And the third essential dimension, promoting well-being at schools. Three dimensions that, as we will see in a minute, are strictly related to each other and needs to be addressed together. Now, the country recommendation is accompanied also by a staff working document, which features a number of interesting research findings, example of possible measures and good practices from the past. But coming to the country recommendation itself, it is basically there a text to support the member states. So the member states are invited to develop an integrated and comprehensive strategy to school success. A strategy which should be based on evidence, on what really works, from good practices from the past, a strategy that should include a whole set of measures. We should go beyond, we should stop having just one-off short-term initiative, but really go for strategic approach with different measures, prevention measures, intervention measures and compensation measures, and with a stronger focus on prevention and early intervention. And we need the strategy to include a wide set of measures, taking into account that learners are different, they have different level of needs. So we will certainly need more universal type of measures, but we will also need more targeted ones for specific group of people, more at risk, and sometimes more individualized provisions. To support the member states in developing those strategies, the Council recommendation proposes a policy framework, a new policy framework with a whole set of measures addressing learners, addressing teachers, trainers and school leaders, addressing schools, and addressing also the system level. Because the idea is that, as I was saying before, we cannot just pick up one measure or one action, but we really need to have a coherent and coordinated approach. And this is what the policy framework is about, is a framework really for a systemic approach for school success. The next slide shows you, let's say, the key principles, the main philosophy behind Pathway, what we call the systemic approach, which is somehow a bit a novelty compared to work in the past. The first, what does this mean? I would say the first idea is that, as I said before, we should stop dealing with issues in an isolated manner. We have to acknowledge that early school leaving, underachievement, poor well-being at schools, they are strictly connected. They have very often common causal antecedents, they have common triggers. They need to be addressed together. And we also have to go beyond a certain idea that well-being at school is a bit of a luxury or something that can, like a secondary thing. Well-being is an integral part of this vision. It's essential for promoting better educational outcomes. Well-being and feeling well at school is essential for all learners really to be more proficient and to progress better in their learning. But systemic approach means also that we need to have coherent and consistent system responses. We need coherence between policies, between, for example, education policies and other policy areas like health, youth or housing, employment. We need coherence and consistency between the different levels of governance within education systems, between the different levels of education. And of course, we need coherence, consistency, and coordination within the same school. This is what we mean when we talk about whole school approach. What we have in mind is really this idea that school success is not just the result of individual efforts of the individual learner or of a very motivated teacher. It is a common endeavor. It is an objective towards which the entire school community, and I would say the entire education system, has to commit.
Annalisa, can I ask you to wrap up in 1 minute? I know you have
1 minute
more
just
slide.
to refer to the second initiative, which is in the next slide, and which is the expert group on well-being at school. As I said, well-being is fully part of this Pathways initiative, but since we have this feeling that this dimension has somehow been neglected so far, the Commission has decided to set up a dedicated expert group composed of experts with different profiles and with different backgrounds, experts from academia, from practice, and their objective, their mandate is really to identify and develop recommendations for policymakers, for practitioners, on how better embed well-being, mental health promotion in school education. So I will stop here. And sorry for being too long.
Thank you so much, Annalisa. It was also very detailed and interesting presentation, and it will connect very well with the next speaker, who is Professor Helen Cowie from University of Surrey. She is a fellow of the British Psychological Society and a chartered counseling psychologist, and she has researched and published widely in the field of anti-bullying interventions at school and university, and on the emotional health and well-being of children. Some examples of her work are From Birth to 16, a book of stories and lesson plans to teach inclusivity, A School for Everyone, and the monograph Peer Support in Schools. Her latest book will appear in May 2023. Helen Cowie will talk about the importance of social and emotional learning and student well-being, connecting therefore with Annalisa's presentation. Helen, if you can do it in 5 minutes, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you, Cosmin, and greetings from sunny Galaxidi in Greece. Now, as we've heard, there are very many challenges facing children and young people today, from the outset of war, the impact of COVID, and concerns about the environment. But there's also, at the same time, a growing concern about the high rates of mental health difficulties amongst children and young people. So what do we mean by positive mental health? The whole concept of this talk, can we have the next slide please, Cosmin, involves enhancing the social and emotional lives of children. From this perspective, mental health is a dynamic state in which children and young people can realize their own abilities and talents, learn to cope with the everyday stresses that we will all face in our lives, develop a sense of their own identity, manage and regulate their emotions, and learn how to build constructive social relationships with one another. And ideally, be given opportunities to practice active citizenship in a supportive community. Next slide, please. There is a huge body and growing body of research evidence in support of the idea that social and emotional learning promotes the emotional well-being of children in all its many forms. So how does it do this? It promotes resilience by giving a voice to the child, by giving many opportunities for children to talk about their experiences, their emotions, their feelings, and even their conflicts with one another, to share ideas. It enhances a sense of belongingness and connectedness, which previous speakers mentioned, by giving opportunities for children to take on responsibility for one another and for the atmosphere in their school. And it enhances this belongingness in full realization of the crucial value of friendship in enhancing children's well-being. Social and emotional learning also addresses the ongoing problem of bullying, cyberbullying, xenophobia, homophobia, racism, social exclusion. These are seen as some of the most serious worries of children, as indicated by a recent survey of Childline. Children worry about these things and feel that this really detracts from their experience at school. And also, social and emotional learning develops opportunities for children to play an active part in their school community. For example, through such initiatives as peer support, where they learn to be upstanders rather than bystanders when something goes wrong in their school community. Can I have the next slide, please? How do we implement these ideals? Well, there are many examples, and one of the first important aspects of this is to develop a whole school approach to social and emotional learning. It's really important that everyone in the school, the staff, the pupils, the parents, and ideally the community as well, are united in their concern to develop across the board a positive attitude to social and emotional learning. So a whole school approach is essential. Also, we need specific lessons in peer support, in social and emotional learning, or personal and social education, as it's sometimes called, with a focus on the emotions, on relationships, and social interaction. Now, this can be done very much in an everyday way, where in the classroom, the teacher regularly encourages positive relationships. And that can be done through cooperative group work, through group paired work, and just through an attitude of helping one another in the classroom in everyday lessons. It's also important and can be enhanced right across the curriculum, where teachers can take opportunities to enhance social and emotional learning in such subjects as social studies, history, language and literature, science, sports, the arts, where they learn about beauty, and being in nature, where they learn about the value of taking care of our environment, as we heard in a previous talk. And then again, there are specific initiatives like peer support against bullying, where children and young people are trained to help their peers when they're experiencing emotional and social difficulties in the school. And there are examples of that throughout schools right across Europe. And there are some wonderful initiatives like the Young Ambassadors, which are widely used across schools in the UK, where children learn about compassion for one another, and they learn about developing respect for people from other cultures, and where they also learn about how to care for children who have particular difficulties. And finally, I'd like to mention the value of restorative practice to resolve conflicts, because these are inevitable things that happen in everyday life, not just at school, but in the workplace as well, and in the community. So the earlier that children can learn to use restorative methods where they resolve difficulties, which result in a win-win situation, rather than one wins and the other loses. This can be used throughout the school and can permeate the whole policies and practices in a school. Of course, we mustn't forget that schools also need to have links with professionals who can help with targeted support for students who have mental health difficulties. But schools should never forget the crucial value of the everyday experience of school and the part that this can play in helping children's well-being. So I'd like to end by saying that if you'd like to know more about some of these initiatives and some of the research findings, please feel free to contact me. My email address is at the beginning of the slide. And any questions, please ask them at the end of this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Helen, for this comprehensive view of social and emotional learning, and also for the concrete examples of how this can be developed and implemented in schools. Now I will give the floor to Claudia Koechler, who will also link, I think, very nicely with your presentation, because she will reflect specifically on the inclusion of disadvantaged children and how to strengthen actually the resilience of educational systems, which is the topic of our webinar. Claudia is the Executive Director of Farafina Institute, a think tank based in Bamberg, Germany. Her areas of expertise include migration, education, social inclusion, and youth and community development in Europe and Africa. She has conducted numerous research studies on the education and social inclusion of migrants and refugees as well. Claudia, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Cosmin. Good afternoon. When we speak of the resilience of educational systems, sorry, I'm trying to flip the, sorry, just a second.
Perhaps there is an arrow down somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Now, when we speak of the resilience of educational systems, we mean the heightened likelihood of success in school and other life accomplishments despite environmental adversities. Such environmental adversities could be disruptions that we can control or prevent only to a limited degree, such as pandemics or wars, but they can also be more permanent factors. For a better understanding, we divide resiliences into personal factors. Those would be age, gender, ethnicity, for example, contextual factors, which are the intended or unintended results of a policy, and situational factors that are based on particular life events, such as the pandemic. Personal and contextual factors are primarily rather permanent, while situational factors mostly are connected with unforeseeable events. Hence, if we can reduce adversities on the personal and contextual level, we reduce disadvantages and strengthen resilience of learners. I want to highlight just a few of these factors. Any national strategy should lead to social equity and be based on principles that diminish overall educational inequalities, which again are exacerbated during times of crisis. This means they should be based on the principle of education being a human right and apply a holistic and inclusive approach to education. Applying the principle of human rights means states must take structural and institutional measures to ensure both equal access for all learners and the quality of education. At all times, all learners, including migrants and other disadvantaged groups, must be treated according to the principle of formal equality, meaning that all children have equal rights and should be treated equally. A holistic approach addresses the learning, social, and emotional needs of learners, while the element of inclusion comes in when the individual needs of learners are met. Furthermore, families' involvement in education is core, and we have to recognize that parental involvement is a relevant resilience factor regardless of the parent's own educational and social background. Rather than assuming a lack of skills, experience, and interest in their children's educational progress among parents with low socioeconomic status, a migrant background, or single parents, we should target the obstacles that these parents face in supporting their children's education. At the same time, multi-agency partnerships are required at both national and international level to develop long-term solutions. Those should include teachers, parents, learners, as well as collaborations between governments, health and community organizations, social work agencies, and other support services. Such partnerships are also instrumental in times of crisis. During unforeseen events or disruptions, especially situational resiliences must be strengthened. Here, when parents are working from home and are able to support their children, this is considered as a factor of resilience. also measures that target the particular needs of vulnerable learners, such as keeping schools open for them, offering counseling, and other forms of support strengthen resilience. Most important are factors of school and teacher capacities, such as the school providing support for teachers and technical support. During the pandemic, engaged distance teaching provisions were key, and the skills of teachers in managing different teaching scenarios. And I want to leave it at this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for keeping up with the time and for sharing this knowledge. That perhaps it is important to mention that the findings that you presented are connected to a NESET report that looks specifically at the impact of COVID on the education of disadvantaged children. Hence, there is a lot to learn from what happened during COVID in education, and I think the findings you presented are very relevant and again link very well with Helen's and Annalisa's presentation regarding the importance of well-being and inclusion in education. So since I believe this topic was also covered quite comprehensively, we will skip the question that we had planned and leave room also for the audience at the end to ask questions. And I will progress to the next topic, which is connected with Ukrainian refugees and migrant children's education. And here we will hear from Ulrike Storost, who is a policy officer for school education in DGAC, and she works on the resilience of education systems. First on the EU policy response to the pandemic, resulting in the 2021 Council recommendation on blended learning, and now on the inclusion of displaced children from Ukraine in schools across the EU. Ulrike, you have 7 minutes.
Yes, thank you. You can hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Cosmin. And indeed, as you already said, a little bit the resilience is the red thread of the work in the school policy team, at least for the last years. So yeah, I wanted to give you the overview of how the EU responded and what is our guidance on the inclusion of the displaced children from Ukraine. As you probably know from your own countries, the arrival of the displaced children from Ukraine last year when the war broke out was really unprecedented in terms of numbers in such a short time span. So there were countries that had previous experience with inclusion of migrants and refugees, which is, by the way, very helpful. We'll see in a second. But this short time span and to be able to ensure quick access and uninterrupted access to education, not only covering the academic needs of these newly arriving children, but also the social needs, and in particular the emotional needs, to be able to give them a safe, the sense of safety, the sense of belonging that helps them to overcome the dramatic sense of loss, that they have undergone by leaving Ukraine. I think this is something that has been very important. Let's say the good thing in the situation was that the legal situation was very clear from the start. The Temporary Protection Directive gave these displaced children from the very start, like the direct access to education. And we, from the European Commission, we helped member states really to overcome this huge challenge by mobilizing all the tools that we have at our disposal. So by making the funding instruments as flexible as possible, by using our online tools to disseminate good practice, and also to bring member states together. And this is the main focus of my presentation, to really exchange in different events on what has been learned from the past, what can we draw on, how we can adapt the experience from the past to the current situation. We held a number of peer learning events starting from March 2022 to all through the year, actually. And we published in June last year a practical manual ahead of the current school year, how to move from the initial emergency responses to a more structural response to make sure that the children from Ukraine are included in education. And yeah, we see right now we are at around 700,000 children from Ukraine that are displaced in the EU that are enrolled in education. We are not yet fully, let's say, there. The picture is very patchy, depending on, of course, depending on the number of children on the territory of the member states. It's very diverse, and so are also the enrollment rates. The NESET network was very helpful in that situation. We worked with experts. We consulted also with the international organizations such as the United Nations Refugee Agency or the Children's Fund. And we try to give like one harmonized message on what we know, what works. And this is what I will present briefly here in 6 chapters, starting with the reception and admission. One of the main messages is to make sure that all children have a place in a host country school, which is in some cases not so easy to ensure because of capacity constraints. We heard already of teacher shortages before. So basically making sure that this happens, it also means overcoming very practical barriers, sometimes registration requirements, financial requirements, ensuring transportation, etc. But this is really crucial in order, what I said, to meet not only the academic needs, but also the social and emotional needs, having children interacting with their peers. Once you have the places at school, you need to, of course, also prepare the schools and the teachers with the additional staff. Here we worked a lot with the Commission department that is in charge of the recognition, or that gives, let's say, has issued a recommendation on how member states can fast track, for example, the access to the teaching profession for educational staff among the Ukrainian refugee community. But also the teachers that are already at the schools, how to guide them and to be prepared for the arrival of newly displaced children in their classrooms. And we have seen that many ministries were quickly also able to put guidance on the websites. For example, how do you prepare for the first day of school? How do you make sure that the other kids are prepared? How, sometimes as simple as putting the name of the new children also on the blackboard already makes them feel much more welcome in their new environment. And this is also then, of course, it continues the role of in the weeks and months to follow, the role of extra support to displaced children. So we dedicated one chapter at language support, where we were able also to draw on a very good NESET report that was published in September, and how to provide psychosocial support. Helen, that was speaking earlier today, she, for example, she was one of the experts in one of our webinars that we held on this particular topic, how teachers can ensure welcoming and everyday routines for children in the classroom. We looked also at non-formal learning activities, for example, how to use the summer period to provide summer camps to enable contact with peers and general integration, for example, language support, also in just by offering non-formal activities in extra curricular classes or for example, during the summer period. The last 3 chapters put a particular focus on working with the displaced families. So there we, I mean, this is important for all migrant refugee situations, that you have a close contact, that you, for example, provide information in the language of the that the families can actually understand. But here also we look particularly at practices, how to use the very good material that the Ukrainian Ministry of Education has put online to enable children to keep in touch with their with the Ukrainian language, history, and culture, and how to to be able to draw on this while at the same time also following the local host country schools. I believe, Cosmin, you will speak a bit more also about the long-term measures to promote inclusive learning for all. I think that's something that we see here as well in this current situation. There are a number of measures that should then also help to make the education system more inclusive for everyone. For example, we see that some countries, think, for example, the Czech Republic, they have set up in this particular situation a system on Czech as a second language, where this is ultimately something that also benefits than other learners that would arrive, and this makes the system more inclusive for everyone. So this is also an opportunity to promote precisely the inclusiveness. And a particular chapter is dedicated to early childhood education and care, because not only in this group from the Ukrainian displaced families, there are many children that are very young, but also the sector of early education and care services has its own specificities. So it's not always obligatory to attend the early childhood education and care. Sometimes it's also fee-based, so families might need additional support to be able to access this very important phase of education. That's it from my side. Thanks a lot. Maybe the last promotion, a lot of very good resources on education and support for Ukrainian refugees are available, and we've made them available in the European School Education Platform and the European Toolkit for Schools. So if you don't have an account yet, don't hesitate to sign up. You get regular news. Also, the training courses that I spoke before, they are available there. Recordings of past webinars, and there's a broad networking area to exchange with other schools and teachers. Thanks a lot. I stop sharing, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you so much, Ulrike, for this broad and interesting overview of the work conducting regarding migrant and refugee children in education. I didn't present myself at the beginning of the webinar as moderator, because I knew that I would be a speaker as well. So I will introduce myself as I did with the other speakers. I am a research fellow at the Center of Research and Intervention in Education at the University of Porto, and also member of the NESET Expert Committee. I hold a PhD in education from University of Porto, and I have been conducting research in education for more than a decade. My work has been focused primarily on early school living and inclusive education, and I'm also a member of the editorial board of the European Toolkit for Schools that Ulrike mentioned as well. And now to link with Ulrike's presentation, I was also one of the experts involved in this work that the Commission has been conducting on the Ukrainian crisis and integration of Ukrainian children in European educational systems. There is not much time for left in the webinar, so I made a few changes to my presentation, and I'm gonna forward, let's say, I'm gonna direct the audiences towards another webinar where you can learn more about these topics and where I have spoken more extensively on this. One key point that I would like to make is that it is important to mainstream diversity into education, and to remember that diversity is very often understood as a cultural diversity when we speak about students from different countries, different ethnic groups, or who speak different languages, and also students with different socioeconomic backgrounds. However, it is also important to remind that diversity is also about students with different needs, students with different life trajectories, students with different interests, aspirations, different dreams. So our view of diversity should not be restricted only to cultural diversity, because when we manage to mainstream diversity into our education, we will get to more inclusive and why not more resilient educational systems for all students, not only for migrant or displaced children. And I think this is a very strong argument that we have to make very often, not to end up with very targeted and specific measures for migrant and refugee children, but think about this whole school approach, these universal approaches that are needed for inclusive education. And then, of course, bearing in mind the specificity and the concrete needs of different groups. And here I brought a few concrete, initially I have brought a few concrete recommendations for how to become an intercultural teacher and welcome refugee children, and some aspects that teachers have to have in mind, namely to avoid considering young people with a refugee or migrant background as being all the same, because life trajectories are very diverse and need to be understood in their complexity. But then, since there is not much time left, as I mentioned, we discussed this in a webinar organized on the 6th of May last year, on the European Toolkit for Schools, entitled Welcoming Newly Arrived Refugees in the Classroom. And this webinar is available at this link. I know that the European School Platform is now being developed and replacing the School Education Gateway, but I believe the recording of this webinar is still available on the School Education Gateway at the link that I provide here, and I will also send you in the chat. And if you watch this recording of the webinar, you will find more evidence regarding what needs to be done when it comes to refugee children and their integration into the classroom. So I will not develop more on this at the moment, but I would like to focus on the NESET report that Ulrike mentioned as well, education intervention supporting newly arrived migrant and displaced children in their language learning needs. And as you know, a very oftenly mentioned barrier by teachers, by education actors and policymakers when it comes to integration of migrant and refugee children is the language barrier. So this report focused specifically on language learning needs. And the findings indicate that efforts are required to ensure that all teachers in schools, as well as early childhood education and care, are trained in teaching the language of instruction as a second language. That is a very important aspect. Opportunities for professional development and support have to be provided in line with the recruitment and retention policies, and newly arrived migrant teacher as well as migrant professionals interested in teaching should be provided opportunities to continue their professional trajectories. And of course, the added value that this brings for migrant and refugee children who can relate to teachers from their own countries. An inclusive multilingualism curricula is also needed that can integrate the language dimension into every aspect of learning. So again, as I was saying, cultural diversity should be mainstreamed, and diversity should be mainstreamed into education and not be just an extra. The same happens with the language dimension. Languages, as you know, are key to development of young people and children, and should be integrated into every aspect of learning. And the integration of newcomers into mainstream classes should be ensured as quickly as possible. So we know from research as well that putting migrant and refugee children in preparatory separate classes and learning spaces for a period that is for long periods of time can be rather detrimental. So the integration into mainstream classes as soon as possible is very important to avoid segregation of refugee children for long periods. And also regardless of this uncertainty over the length of their stay. So there is often this tendency to think, you know, the war is going to end soon and it's not worth it to mess or to confuse the children, and we have to keep them on a separate educational model, on a separate basis, because soon they will return. We don't know when return will be possible, and we are unfortunately now more than 1 year into this war that Monica explained at the very beginning, the strong impacts that it had on Ukrainian children, and then also on European civil society and education institutions. So since we are 1 minute towards the end of our webinar, I will stop here. And I noticed from our chat that there are no questions for the speaker. There was for the speakers, there was only one comment regarding precisely how to render cultural diversity sustainable, and I think I approached this relevant comment when I discussed the issue of mainstreaming diversity into education and integrating it in all aspects of education, also through a whole school approach. So before we close, I would like to thank you all for being here today. We hope that we managed to address this pressing question of what renders educational systems resilient. And for the closing remarks, I will now give the floor to Monica Kepe. And Monica, you can close the webinar. You can have the last word. You don't need to hand back to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And seeing the time also, I wanted to be also just very quick and highlight again that if there is one thing that we have learned the past few years due to the pandemic, due to the war in Ukraine, is that the future will always surprise us. And this is why we need also the resilience to cope in this world that is in constant change, in constant disequilibrium. And I think what was very clear today from all the interventions is that education is key when it comes to strengthening cognitive, social, emotional resilience, well-being among all learners. And this is also what helps us all to understand that living in the world, it means trying, failing, adapting, learning, unlearning, relearning, evolving. And we do it as learners, but it's also something very important for our educational institutions, for our education systems. They also need to become more resilient to be able to succeed despite, or also because of the constant disruptions. And this resilience provides individuals, institutions, and the communities with the flexibility, with the intelligence, responsiveness, all this they need to be able to thrive in social and economic change. And what we have also learned today that this means for public policy and also public policy makers to become far more imaginative, and also for us working in education. I think it was again very important conclusion from today that education is too important to be based on experiments, to be based on ideology. We have to make sure that the decisions we take, they are really based on hard evidence and the research and the researchers' input that was also shared today. So with these words, I just wanted to thank you all for the excellent presentations, also the moderator, all the speakers, and thank you also for the audience for bearing with us for 1.5 hours. Thank you so much, and goodbye.